Welcome to the deep dive. You know the drill. We take the densest, most provocative source material, the stuff that, really challenges your perception of reality, and we try to distill it into practical, memorable knowledge.
And today, we are definitely strapping in.
We're exploring a breakdown, a survival story that feels, well, it feels unnervingly prophetic.
It really does. We are plunging into Doris Lessing's visionary 1974 novel, The Memoirs of a Survivor.
And this isn't just a story. It's a work that explores the complete, total unraveling of civilization.
Exactly. The exterior rules of society just fall apart. But what Lessing does, and this is what makes it so powerful, is she maps that societal collapse onto a deeply personal, internal search for meaning, for stability.
Our sources point out this immediate paradox, which I find fascinating. Lessing herself described the book as an attempt at autobiography.
Right, which is a strange thing to say.
A very strange thing to say, because it has the unmistakable structure and, the tone of a magical tale or fable.
It operates on both levels simultaneously.
So that's our mission today. We are going to analyze this blueprint of a near-future societal collapse. A collapse where, and this is the key phrase, everyday barbarism is the new normal.
And we'll explore the two realities. Lessing forces you to confront, first, the terrifying external anarchy of this emptying city.
And second, the narrator's intensely private, almost phantasmagoric inner world.
We really want to give you the framework for understanding the human reaction when the fundamental rules of life, things like law, economics, even just basic courtesy, when they all vanish.
What kind of strange, resilient new life springs up in those cracks?
And maybe more importantly, what truths about our own human nature only emerge when everything else is stripped away. You're going to get a deep dive into the psychology of survival when the ground quite literally dissolves beneath your feet.
Okay, so before we jump into the chaos of the city's collapse, we should probably ground ourselves in the author.
Absolutely. Because Doris Lessing is not just spinning some sci-fi yarn here. This work comes from a very, very serious literary tradition.
She's a literary powerhouse?
A Nobel laureate, no less.
Mm.
And her unique perspective is, I think, forged by her early life. She was born in Persia in 1919, but then spent her childhood on a farm in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe.
And that experience, seeing these rigid social hierarchies, the colonial structures, all set against this vast, untamed landscape, that must have been foundational.
It absolutely gave her this deep understanding of social organization, but also of its brittleness, how quickly it can all come apart.
She then arrives in England in 1949, and she's literally carrying the manuscript of her first novel, The Grass is Singing.
And right away, she establishes herself as this vital new voice. She was exploring themes that were, incredibly complex for the time. The role of women, the nature of consciousness.
And intense political and personal upheaval. It's all there from the beginning.
Her whole body of work, if you look at landmarks like The Golden Notebook or the entire Children of Violence sequence, it shows this consistent engagement with breaking down conventional notions of reality.
Which is key to understanding the memoirs of a survivor.
It's everything. Our sources describe this book as the quintessence of Doris Lessing. It's her developing themes that she had already explored, particularly in two other books, The Four-Gated City and Briefing for a Descent into Hell.
Okay, so let's dig into that connection for a second. What's the thematic line that ties The Four-Gated City, which deals with mental breakdown and expanding consciousness?
Right.
How does that connect to the kind of societal collapse we see in memoirs?
It's her insistence that there is an internal life, a psychic landscape, that is just as real, if not sometimes more real than the external physical world.
So in The Four-Gated City, she was exploring things like telepathy, extreme subjectivity.
Exactly. And here, in Memoirs, she takes that concept and she literalizes it.
Yeah.
The world falls apart. Okay. But the narrator's consciousness discovers a literal, functioning parallel reality behind her living room wall.
The failure of the external world actually forces her inward.
It forces her to confront the architecture of her own mind. It's the only place left where any kind of order seems possible.
Okay, let's unpack this core foundation of the narrative then, because the structure is so essential. The story takes its leap into the fantastic, as the sources say, but only from a ground of the most solid reality.
And that solid reality is the setting. It's immediate, it's tangible. This isn't some, distant post-apocalyptic future with laser guns. It's described as the everyday of a few years hence, when barbarism is what is normal.
So the collapse is recent, it's fresh, it's still happening all around them?
Yes. The narrator lives on the ground floor of an old block of flats, and she's just watching society unravel from her window day by day.
And the physical conflict is brutal and right there on her doorstep. The city is emptying out, it's becoming overgrown with plants reclaimed by animals.
And the people who are left are constantly fighting for survival. Not just against other brutalized adults, but, and this is maybe even more frightening, against these little children who are so brutalized by necessity, they are more frightening than the ferocious adults.
These aren't survivors in a wilderness. They're survivors in a disintegrating city.
Huddling together in these little self-made tribes just for protection. That's the stage. And right in the middle of all this anarchy, the personal drama begins.
The narrator is suddenly given a responsibility she never, ever asked for.
A young girl named Emily is just left with her by a stranger with this stark instruction: look after her. She is your responsibility.
And with Emily comes this truly bizarre, deeply symbolic animal, Hugo.
Who becomes the emotional, even philosophical anchor for their entire little survival unit.
It's this forced domesticity, this instant creation of a tribe within utter chaos that really forms the heart of the narrator's external life.
While her internal life is starting to do something else entirely.
Okay, so let's talk about that crumbling outer world. Lessing makes a really fascinating structural choice. She doesn't give the civilizational failure a specific name. It's not a war or a crash or a pandemic.
No, she calls it it.
Just it, this amorphous, omnipresent, and frankly, deeply unsettling term. What is it, and why do you think that abstraction is so effective?
Well, it functions as this perfect rhetorical device for things we just can't grasp or control. Lessing defines it as a force, a power that crystallizes in times of crisis. It could take the form of an earthquake, pestilence, war, tyranny.
The specific form doesn't matter as much as the feeling it produces.
Exactly. Philosophically, it is the word we use for helpless ignorance or of helpless awareness. It's a term for humanity's inadequacy when we face a threat that just transcends our normal understanding or our agency.
It's that moment the whole collective psyche just says, we don't know what's happening, but we are absolutely terrified.
And the breakdown wasn't a sudden cataclysm. That's another key point. The narrator specifically notes that before it became this immediate, obvious threat, they were in a really prolonged stage of just generalized unease.
A slow, creeping dread.
Yes, the source material really emphasizes that this unease and tension before the end was the same for everybody, everywhere. The apprehension wasn't a single event. It was a slow process.
The book uses the word realize.
Right, with its connotation of a gradual opening into comprehension. People knew things were fundamentally wrong, but they couldn't name the specific mechanism of their demise. They just felt that tension tightening day by day.
And this feeling is just compounded by the narrator's observation of the total failure of official information. We see echoes of this today, but Lessing captures it perfectly.
She does. The official sources, newscasts, papers, government pronouncements, they were constantly being made. But their primary purpose was to keep people from becoming despondent, anxious.
They were basically just massaging reality, not reporting it.
And crucially, the narrator confirms that these channels were not where people got the facts. Official information was.
Yeah.
It was disregarded. People would discuss it, complain about it.
But they didn't act on it.
No. The narrator suggests it was regarded almost as entertainment, a kind of comfort blanket, a performance of continuity. But people did not act on it unless they were physically forced to. It lost all operative meaning.
This is where the sociological insight gets really deep. The true information, the news that was in the air, it came through casual, almost accidental conversations. And that led to immediate action.
Yes. This subterranean network of rumor worked so much better than the press.
Can you give us an example of how that worked?
Certainly. Weeks before the official announcement that a basic food item was going to be rationed, people like the narrator and their neighbors were already quietly hoarding it. Let's say potatoes.
They weren't reading it in the papers.
Not at all. They heard a casual remark from a friend, or they noticed a small, unexplained shortage at a specific market, and their inherent human intuition just took over. The animal brain kicked in.
So information becomes decentralized, personal, and immediately actionable. It completely bypasses all the formal structures.
Exactly. People were casually exchanging remarks like, we shouldn't leave things too long, talking about their position in the city long before the authorities ever admitted the city was emptying.
It's this shared intuition, this sense that everyone knows the formal sources are lying or irrelevant.
That becomes the real mechanism of survival. It wasn't logic. It was a collective gut feeling leading to decentralized, immediate self-interest.
And all this leads directly to the core paradoxical atmosphere of the time, which the narrator calls the ordinariness of the extraordinary.
A fantastic phrase.
It is. All forms of social organization were breaking up, yet people were so determined, so stubborn in their attempts to lead an ordinary life. They were, in effect, performing civilization even as it burned down around them.
The contrast is horrifying when you look at the examples she gives. The source highlights the police pursuing the story of a single kidnapped child for days on end.
Right, dedicating hundreds of officers, intense media coverage, all for one life.
And then the very next news flash would detail the mass death of thousands, maybe even millions, in some distant region, and it would get, 30 seconds of airtime.
But is that really cognitive dissonance, or is it the only way humanity can function? I mean, if they fully accepted the reality of that mass death, wouldn't that lead directly to the instant collapse of the social contract?
That is the core tension Lessing is exposing. People needed to believe that the focused, traditional concern on that single child represented us.
That society still cared about the individual.
Exactly. While the mass catastrophe was just some unfortunate minor accident interrupting the normal flow of civilization, it's the ultimate psychological shield.
Because to look mass death in the face is to admit that you might be next.
And if you admit that, you can't function. You can't farm, you can't collect firewood, you can't go on.
This pretense, what the narrator calls the game we were all agreeing to play, it was vital to defeating that feeling of unreality, that feeling that the ground was dissolving under our feet.
The real enemy wasn't the gangs or the famine. It was allowing yourself to know what was truly happening.
And this commitment to the game, as you call it, leads to some deeply absurd situations. The farce of the citizen groups.
Oh, it's incredible. You have organizations trying to improve old age pensions when money was already giving way to barter.
Arguing about actuarial tables while the only currency is potatoes and rabbit pelts.
Or groups working to restore decency in sexual practices.
Right.
Or, my favorite, attempting to reason with, or, birch, the newly formed savage gangs of hooligans.
It's spitting into a hurricane. What does Lessing think of this? Is this heroic or is it just pathetic?
The narrator stays ambiguous, which I think is the point. She questions whether this behavior is merely comic or if it represents an admirable sign of vitality that might eventually defeat the chaos.
They're trying to impose the old, predictable forms of order, the committee meeting, the bureaucratic petition.
Onto an utterly unrecognizable reality. It's a desperate act of faith that the old world must still exist somewhere, and if they just hold on to the ritual, it might materialize again.
It's tragic, but it's also this potent example of how deeply ingrained our social performances really are.
And we see that the collapse is happening primarily as a psychological event, which is just manifested externally. So, as the external world dissolves into rumor and absurd ritual,
the narrator turns inward for any sense of control.
That's right.
So, while the external world is dealing with tribalism and the farce of pensions, the narrator's internal world is staging its own, much stranger reality. This is the place behind the wall. And this is where the core of Lessing's philosophical statement really lies.
It is. The narrator first experiences this uncomfortable shift. She realized that her ordinary daytime life, in her comfortable, shabby flat dealing with survival and Emily, it had become irrelevant.
The center of gravity in her life had moved.
It had moved to the mystery that was taking place somewhere else.
And what makes this space so compelling is its physical impossibility. Her living room wall was thick, solid. It bordered a corridor her neighbors used.
Standard apartment building layout.
Right. Yet she becomes aware that a room, or a whole set of rooms, was occupying the exact same space as the corridor, or overlapping with it. It completely defies Euclidean geometry.
And the consciousness of this other life wasn't a hallucination. It was a slow, tactile realization. She describes listening to the wall as being like holding a fertile egg that was due to hatch.
She sensed a throbbing.
A living pulse. She felt that a weight redistributes itself behind this impenetrable barrier. The reality was manifesting itself slowly. It demanded patience and it demanded belief.
The breakthrough moment finally arrives one morning when the sunlight falls on the wall. She's looking at the glow, the pulse of the yellow light, focusing on this half-obliterated pattern of old wallpaper.
And then, without any physical movement, no disruption, I was through the wall.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Yeah.
And initially what she finds there is a place of profound possibility. The rooms are disused, they're empty of conventional furniture, but she feels this most vivid expectancy, a longing.
She recognizes it instantly.
Yes, feeling this was the place she had been waiting for. Oh yes, all my life, all my life. It's the psychological space of pure potential.
It's a large, light, airy, delightful flat or house,
Yeah.
and she glimpses a painter in white overalls lifting a roller to lay fresh white paint over stained surfaces.
Which is the initial hint of preparation, of creation, a fresh start.
But this promise quickly dissolves, and the task she inherits in this space becomes Sisyphean.
The visits change dramatically. The rooms quickly become these scenes of intentional, almost grotesque destruction. She finds beautiful furniture that has been deliberately slashed and jabbed with bayonets or knives, with stuffing just spewing out.
It signifies historical trauma, repeated violations.
And one room, horrifically, looked as if it had been used as a butcher's shop. There were feathers, blood, bits of offal.
And the narrator's task, which she knows she can never truly complete, is to constantly clean and mend and repair this psychic detritus.
And the disorder, the anarchy, it seems to happen without an agent being present. It's almost like a poltergeist. It's the legacy of human cruelty and chaos that resides in the collective memory, and she is burdened with its eternal maintenance.
And we have to emphasize the impermanence of it all. The feeling of relatedness or continuity belonged only to that particular visit.
Right. The next time she goes to the wall, the room would be different. The damage would be new. The cleaning required would be entirely unique. It forces her to be absolutely present in the moment of destruction and repair, never getting ahead, never finishing.
The source material draws this really critical distinction between two types of scenes she finds behind the wall: the impersonal and the personal. How do these two realities function differently for her?
The impersonal scenes, so the generalized disorder, the needed cleaning, the act of imposing temporary order onto chaos, they surprisingly offer her a sense of lightness, of freedom, a feeling of possibility.
That's interesting. You'd think it would be demoralizing.
You would. But in those scenes, you have agency. You have the choice to walk into another room and start fresh. It's the work of making sense of historical noise, but you're not trapped by it.
But the personal scenes, they're different.
Completely different. They're often dealing with memory or childhood, and they're infinitely recognizable by their atmosphere of a prison. The air is tight and limited.
And time itself behaves differently.
Above all, in these rooms, time was a strict, unalterable law. And long, oh my God, it went on and on and on.
These scenes are profoundly linked to past trauma, to the helplessness of being a child.
We see a small girl, again, maybe it's Emily, maybe it's the narrator's inner child absorbed into this child space where everything's enormous and implacable. There's the family tyranny of the unimportant, symbolized by a rocking horse and a hard white clock that dictates every single minute.
She is trapped in scenes from her own past.
Scenes marked by cruelty, scrutiny, and this terrible, suffocating sense of being confined.
It's the sheer force of unalterability in those personal scenes that is so terrifying. It's the knowledge that nothing can change, nothing can happen but what you see happening.
It's the perfect definition of a trauma loop. The narrator seeks freedom from the external chaos, only to find that the internal chaos is often worse because it's bound by the unyielding laws of memory and historical pain.
Okay, let's step back into that dissolving external world and look at the new unit of survival the narrator has been given.
Emily and Hugo.
Emily. She's introduced as a child who is physically small and young, but definitely world-worn. She is a product of this collapsing world.
Her initial behavior is the precise measure of the trauma she carries. She displays what's called an invincible obedience. She's frantically trying to anticipate and forestall any criticism.
She's infinitely obliging.
But this isn't natural childhood deference. It's a high-wire act of self-preservation that's masking this deep, deep tension.
And her only real refuge is her bed.
Yes, which she makes into a nest or womb of coiled blankets and pillows where she can retreat, hide, and just recover from the continuous pressure to be constantly bright and good. It's a desperate attempt to create a secure, contained space when the outside world offers none.
But she's not alone. She is accompanied by one of the most remarkable characters in all of Lessing's work, Hugo.
This bizarre beast, he's a philosophical statement wrapped in a hybrid body.
Can you describe Hugo in the detail the source material offers? Because it's so important to visualize this creature.
He's an aberration, a physical impossibility, yet he's entirely real within this narrative. He's the size of a bulldog, shaped like a sturdy dog, but he has the delicate face and whiskers of a cat.
And the eyes.
Powerful, blazing green, inhuman cat's eyes. And a long, whip-like tail. His hide is yellow and harsh. The narrator calls him an ugly beast, but in the same breath says he's lovable.
He is the protector, the anchor.
His role is paramount. He is explicitly Emily's animal. He keeps constant watch over her. The narrator observes that he shows fidelity, humility, endurance, all the traditional dog virtues. But those cat's eyes suggest a genus foreign to man, one that judges human vanity.
The narrator goes deep into the psychology of this relationship. She speculates that our emotional life is actually shared with animals.
And that Hugo's devotion to Emily is akin to romantic love. It's all pining and yearning. And this brings us to a specific point in the source material. Lessing's use of the concept of amour propre.
Right, for our listeners, that's a French term. It's often translated as self-esteem, but here it suggests more like vanity or ego. Why does the narrator suggest we refuse to acknowledge the intelligence of creatures like Hugo?
It's purely self-defense. The narrator thinks we refuse to acknowledge the intelligence of the creatures all around us because the shock to our amour propre would be too much.
If we really recognize the depth of their emotional and cognitive lives,
It would force a humiliating judgment on ourselves. We'd have to see ourselves as blundering, blind, callous, cruel murderers for how we treat them and the world. Hugo is Emily's anchor, but he's also a constant, silent judgment on humanity's failures.
now let's look at Emily's sudden acceleration, her development. She goes through this period of indolence, just lolling on the sofa, eating, making these sharp little comments on passersby.
It's a defense mechanism. She's judging them critically because she doesn't trust the world.
Yeah.
She's trying on an identity of aloof judgment.
And this period ends abruptly. It's triggered by scorn from some neighborhood boys.
In a world where immediate social standing dictates survival, this scorn forces a crisis. Emily stops eating, and her transformation happens in an explosion of days. She accelerates from a small child to a young woman who seems 17 or 18, even though she isn't yet 14.
Time in her personal growth has speeded up to meet the demands of her environment.
It had to. And this new self is immediately presented through these fantastic costumes she makes from the rubbish heaps of our old civilization.
Yeah.
This self-portraiture is absolutely fascinating. She collects old clothes and materials to create these archetypal dresses.
The bride, the nymph, the calculating woman.
It's a really sophisticated survival mechanism. It is her inner self literally trying on self-portraits and choosing experience,
Yeah.
even in the middle of chaos.
These images drawn from the dead civilization were indestructible and so irrelevant in a time of savagery.
Yet they fulfilled this profound necessity, defining her public role. And when a dress had served its purpose, she would just cut off the bottom in a gesture of derisive impatience. The costume was a tool, discarded when used up, enabling her to step forward into vulnerability while still being protected by a chosen persona.
And as she steps into this new chosen role, her perception of the old systems becomes crystal clear.
Oh yeah, she immediately rejects school. She dismisses it as irrelevant or just a mechanism of control, extensions of the army. She knows she doesn't need the education that was destined for the whites' privileged class because that class is already obsolete.
Her new education is entirely practical,
Yeah.
social.
Exactly. She quickly attaches herself to Gerald's developing tribe, Gerald being one of these new self-made leaders. Emily becomes the energetic, knowledgeable source of information. She knows where to find goods, the bus schedule, who has horses.
She is openly called Gerald's girl.
Which is an interesting phrase, isn't it? It's this emotional, verbal hangover from the old society's patriarchal patterns, even if their actual relationship is communal and focused entirely on resourcefulness. She is, in a word, indispensable.
So we've established that the old civilization is dead. The new unit of survival is the small, adaptable tribe. But what new sociological blueprints emerge from the rubble? Lessing starts by showing us the unexpected resilience of the old society's rejects, the Ryans.
The Ryans were the epitome of everything the old, respectable middle class despised. A large, chaotic family, Irish father, Polish mother, 11 children.
Their house was filthy. They lived day to day. That often stole just for the sake of the act, not even for possession. They were everything the old society labeled as feckless and irresponsible, hopeless, futureless.
Yes, but they held this unexpected, almost philosophical advantage. The narrator says the goal of the saints and philosophers was theirs by birthright.
Explain that. What was the spiritual advantage they had?
It was pure detachment. They lived entirely in the present. Each day was sufficient unto itself, detached from consequences, and they had absolutely no attachment to property.
While the respectable middle class lived for future gain, for savings, pensions, maintaining appearances.
The Ryans had already achieved a kind of existential minimalism. They had no facade to maintain, no future to protect, and no property that could be lost.
And this detachment proved to be the ultimate survival skill. When the bad times started, the The Ryans and others like them were suddenly incredibly capable and adaptable.
Precisely. The narrator notes they were eating better and more healthfully now than when civilization had fed them. Meanwhile, the middle class, who relied on bureaucracy and respectability and gain, they just faded away.
Because they lack these essential hand-to-mouth, moment-to-moment survival skills.
The Ryans simply disappeared into the new society. They were absorbed by the chaos they were already intimately familiar with, whereas the middle class was undone by the sheer inconvenience of the breakdown.
So, while the Ryans dissolve into this new natural order, young men like Gerald are attempting to create a purposeful, orderly community in the ruins of an old people's home.
Right. Gerald's tribe was an attempt to reconstruct the old order, but with a primitive, essential focus. They were gardening, practicing mutual aid, and they established Gerald as this responsible, almost paternal leader.
They were ingenious.
Very. Making compost, breeding rabbits, making illegal gardens in the cracks of the city's sidewalks. They represented a functional regression, a conscious attempt to build stability from the ground up.
But then, the truly new and frightening social unit appears. The underground gang. The Terror Children.
And these children are terrifying because they have entirely slipped outside any known social terms. They are very young. The oldest is maybe 9 or 10, and some were literally born in the underground and just abandoned.
They have no loyalty.
And critically, they have no memory of the old world's rules. Their behavior is based entirely on minute-by-minute alliances, impulse, and violence, including murder.
This highlights the horrifying normalcy of their savagery. Gerald recounts seeing the 4-year-old Dennis participating in a murder.
And a child born the year the first travelers came through was as tough as the others, being the first to let go with a stone. They represent the human-eyed, just completely unleashed and unsocialized.
And this is where Gerald's catastrophic need to save them comes in. Gerald, the leader who established order, he cannot tolerate the thought of these children being lost.
He embodies that deep, ingrained impulse of the old world to protect the vulnerable. So despite resistance from everyone in his household, he wears them down, and he brings the 20 or so savages into the house.
The result is immediate, swift, and total destruction.
They run shrieking through the house, they tear up the vegetable garden, they put their fists through the precious polythene windows Gerald had installed, and then they set fire to the ground floor of the home.
And when Gerald and Emily attempt a reasonable but stern talk, using the language of the old, predictable world, they are brutally attacked.
Hit with cudgels, bitten, scratched, by children, none over 10 years old. But the most revealing, the most profound detail in this whole scene is the reaction of the civilized adults.
The narrator notes that their arms are paralyzed.
That's right. The ingrained inhibition against hitting or hurting a child is so strong, it's a core tenet of the old society's moral code, that they cannot bring themselves to strike back effectively.
But these children have no such inhibition.
None. They have no knowledge of that old moral order. So they are infinitely more dangerous and more powerful than the adults who are fatally constrained by their own civilization.
It's the Achilles heel of empathy.
It is. The adults are shocked into impotence by this cognitive leap. The realization that the thing they are programmed to protect is now the pure agent of their destruction. And this breakdown leads to this massive neighborhood meeting.
500 people gathering on the pavement to discuss the Terror Children.
And their collective fear is complex. It's not just the fear of being bitten or murdered.
What is it then?
Their primary fear is not the children themselves. It's that calling the police or the army will trigger authorities' attention. They are terrified of a cleanout by the administration.
Which would destroy all the illegal, emergent forms of new life they've worked so hard to establish?
Exactly. The gardens, the barter systems, the animal coops. Officially, none of this new pragmatic life is supposed to exist, and they worry authority will just sweep it all away in its quest for bureaucratic order.
So the community would rather face the threat of murder than face the return of an official, irrelevant, self-serving authority. That speaks volumes about the loss of faith in the old government.
It does. But the meeting is interrupted by the Terror Children themselves. They arrive chanting, "I am the key of the castle, you are a dirty rascal."
A familiar nursery rhyme.
Transformed into a war song. And it lands with this devastating psychological force. It makes the crowd realize that those children were ourselves. They embody the repressed chaos, the selfish, destructive id that always lay just beneath the surface of the polite world.
And the crowd just stands there, silent, indecisive, paralyzed again.
Despite the very real fear of their neighborhood going up in flames, no one can bring themselves to call the police. because the consequence would be the destruction of the fragile new life they have built.
The children eventually just edge away into the dusk, and when the police finally arrive in their shrieking cars, the pavement is empty.
The community has made its choice. They've chosen emergent, illegal life over official authority.
So as the city empties completely, we see the final acts of both the old and the new societies. Professor White and his family, who represent the official class, the administrators, the bureaucracy, they make their final exit.
And the Whites leave in their old social uniform. They're dressed for traveling, heading off to secure a spot on an official flight using astronomical bribes. They are entirely in the new style of ruthless survival.
While desperately maintaining the outward illusion of order.
Right up to the end. They say, "Goodbye, goodbye. It was nice to have you both as neighbors. See you soon, perhaps." Their panic is masked by this old social performance. They are clinging to the idea of a central authority that will save the right kind of people.
But the narrator, Emily and Hugo, they decide not to leave.
They've found a precarious balance. They've acquired air and water purifiers, distrusting the very elements they now swim in, and they have enough food. They view the silence from the north and west, where all the migrating tribes went, as utterly foreboding.
No word ever comes back from that mass exodus.
Not a word. So they hold fast to their location because for the narrator, the center of reality is no longer on a map. It's that wall.
There is a moment when the narrator tests their own loyalty.
She does. She speculates about what would happen if someone asked them if they would sacrifice Hugo to survive. They would rationalize, of course, say that humans come first. But the reality is that Hugo is their core anchor. He provides emotional stability, a focus for their love.
This botch of a creature is the center of their reality, the one thing they cannot betray.
And now we see the final, ultimate convergence. The outer world and the inner world behind the wall finally come together. As the city dies, the inner realm shifts to reflect the true necessities of survival.
The disordered rooms, the scenes of historical trauma, they are finally replaced.
They're replaced by the most powerful image of hope and continuity in the entire book. The gardens above gardens.
What is that?
The narrator enters a garden filled with things of usefulness and industry. Vegetables, radishes, melons, raked beds ready for planting. It is a place filled with industry, usefulness, hope. It's productive, but it's still earthly.
But the profound sense of security comes from the realization that under this garden is another identical, equally extensive garden occupying the same area.
Yes. This lower garden is also supplied with sun and wind and rain, and it's even more comforting in its duplication.
This other world is intensely productive and sustaining. It's doubling their efforts and their security.
And the water source for this double garden is melted snow water from distant mountains, channeled efficiently by a silent gardener. This underworld feeds and sustains them. It offers intimations of life that grow more powerful as the ordinary world outside fades away.
The symbolism is clear.
It is. True sustenance and meaning must be rooted in something deeper, something non-physical yet functionally essential.
The narrator recognizes her own smallness in this grand final vision. She's conscious that she is doing as she is bid, held always in the hollow of a great hand which enclosed my life, and used me for purposes I was too much beetle or earthworm to understand.
The chaos is receding. The city is dying. But life plants, animals, new survival skills is growing in the cracks, fed by this mystical, sustaining underworld of order.
The initial feeling of being sucked down and away into the world behind the wall is replaced by a purposeful connection.
The final knowledge Lessing offers us is that the world behind the wall, the world of real memory, of possibility, of sustained creation, is just as extensive, productive, and subject to ordered, eternal laws as the fleeting, visible world.
The only thing that truly survives is the architecture of consciousness and memory.
Manifested as a continuous, regenerative garden. It's the ultimate contrast. External reality dissolves into minute-by-minute anarchy and impulse, but the internal reality resolves into this layered, productive order, channeling distant, pure water to sustain life.
This deep dive into Lessing's work has taken us through an extraordinary landscape, a landscape defined by velocity, the sheer speed of societal collapse,
The velocity of Emily's accelerated development.
and the Ryan's instantaneous transformation from societal reject to capable survivor. The book asks us to consider what human elements survive when the framework of civilization is just gone.
And the book shows us that in the ruins, the new social unit is the tribe. And it's defined by ruthless survival, minute-by-minute alliances, and momentary impulse.
But it also highlights those innate elements of human nature.
It does. Like Gerald's fundamental and ultimately fatal need to protect the weak, or Emily's capacity for rapid resourcefulness. These are the things that are necessary to build any functioning society, even if it's just in the ruins of an old people's home.
The tension between the impulse to protect and the necessity to survive is what kills the civilized man.
Precisely.
So, what does this all mean for us? Lessing's narrator notes that one of the worst things about the new era was the inconsequence.
The inconsequent.
The ability to share food and chat pleasantly with someone in the morning only to realize that they might have planned to murder you for a whim the night before without any remorse or consequence.
The disappearance of the norm is the real terror. That lack of predictability, that absolute surrender to impulse. It highlights the immense, hidden psychic effort that's required just to maintain our basic social contract.
When the ground dissolves, you find out exactly how much repression, how much social conditioning is needed just to keep soup sharing from becoming a prelude to murder.
So what must we constantly channel and socialize and repress in ourselves just to maintain the norm, so that sharing a simple meal doesn't immediately become a matter of life and death?
That's your takeaway question for this deep dive.
And remember the contrast. The external world demands impulsive action and immediate gain, but the internal world, the true source of sustenance and security, is a garden. Above gardens, requiring continuous, silent, purposeful maintenance.
Perhaps the work of maintaining order of cleaning and repairing, both internally and externally, is the one eternal task that matters.
Regardless of the level of civilization you inhabit.
We've been through the wall and come back. We hope you feel thoroughly informed and maybe a little unnerved by the sheer depth of Doris Lessing's vision. We'll see you on the next deep dive.